You know when you open a puzzle box with like 1,000 pieces and you just stare at it wondering where to even start? Well, today we're diving into a puzzle that's thousands of years old, hidden right inside the pages of the Bible. It's a pretty specific take on prophecy that claims to have found the key to unlock a whole hidden timeline. So let's see if we can make these pieces fit.
All right, our very first puzzle piece is this number, 2,300. It pops up in the book of Daniel, and it marks a period of days. The prophecy says that at the end of this time, a sanctuary will be cleansed. Now, whether that's a real physical place or something else entirely, well, that's kind of the whole mystery, isn't it?
Next up, we've got 1,260. Now, this number is a recurring one in Scripture. It often shows up when talking about a period of serious trouble and the reign of this powerful, deceptive figure. So you can bet this is another absolutely crucial piece of our timeline.
And our third key number, 1,335. The prophet Daniel gets really specific about this one. He says that whoever waits and makes it to this day is blessed. So whatever this number is pointing to, it's got to be a good thing, a really pivotal event.
So that's the big question, right? We've got 2,300, 1,260, and 1,335. Are they just random, purely symbolic? Or, and this is what this interpretation argues, are they interlocking gears in a super detailed countdown clock for the final years of history?
So, let's get into it. How do all these numbers actually work together? The theory we're exploring today claims it's all about one key, one single key that makes every single piece just lock perfectly into place.
Here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the core assumption, the thing that unlocks this whole puzzle. Then, we'll build the timeline piece by piece, clear up a really important detail about what the temple actually is, and then finally, we'll see how this whole framework accounts for every single day.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. This entire interpretation, the whole thing, hinges on one single crucial decision. It's all about how you read one little phrase in one verse from the book of Daniel. And trust me, that one choice changes everything.
But before we get to that key, we need to lay out the puzzle board itself. According to this view, this whole prophecy plays out in a final 7-year period. It's often called the last week, and 7 years comes out to a total of 2,520 days. Remember that number, 2520. That's our whole timeline. And here it is. This is the key. A verse in Daniel is usually read to mean that a major event happens at the midpoint of those 7 years. But this interpretation argues that the original Hebrew can also mean that the event happens for the entire duration of the first half of that week. I know, it sounds like a tiny detail, but that one little linguistic shift, it changes absolutely everything.
And you can see the huge impact right here. If this prophetic bad guy, the son of perdition, shows up in the middle of the 7 years, then only the last half is really the focus. But if he's there for the first half, it means he shows up on day 1. And that means the entire 2,520-day clock starts ticking right away.
So this is the central thesis, the big idea. Based on that one interpretation, this whole framework says that the 2,300-day prophecy doesn't just start at some random point. No, it begins on the very same day that the final 7-year last week begins. There are 2 overlapping countdowns that start at the exact same moment.
Okay, so with that core assumption locked in, we can actually start building our timeline. Let's see how these puzzle pieces start to fit onto our 2,520-day map. So here's the basic frame. Day 1, the final 7 years kick off, marked by the appearance of the son of perdition in a physical temple on earth. And the timeline wraps up 2,520 days later. Simple enough, right? Now let's start adding our other numbers. Hey, remember that blessed number 1,335? Well, this framework slots it in right here. It marks the first resurrection of the saints, a moment when believers are supposedly delivered from all the chaos. And notice, it doesn't happen at the very end, but partway through. And now we add our main number. That 2,300-day prophecy, which also started way back on day 1, finishes right here on day 2,300. This event, the cleansing of the sanctuary, is timed to happen at the exact same moment that the devastating 7 plagues end on earth. But wait a minute, that brings up a really good question.
Right, so if the son of perdition messes up a physical temple on earth at the beginning of the week, is that the same sanctuary that gets cleansed on day 2,300? Well, the source material we're looking at says no. Not at all. It argues there's a huge difference between two very different temples.
So this interpretation splits the idea in two. First, you've got the actual physical temple building in Jerusalem. In this view, it's just a stage, basically a pile of stones for this evil figure to do his thing. But the real focus, the one that matters, is the real temple, the spiritual sanctuary up in heaven. That's the one that can't be touched by evil, and that's the one that gets spiritually cleansed.
So the whole point is this connection between heaven and earth. As the 7 plagues are wrapping up down here on earth, a process of atonement, or cleansing, is being finished in the heavenly real temple. The end of one thing signals the completion of the other. So the event on day 2300 is mostly a heavenly one.
Now, if you've been doing the math in your head, you might have noticed there's a gap. The last week is 2,520 days long, but the plagues and the cleansing are done on day 2,300. That leaves this final 220-day period. So, what on earth happens in that window?
Well, this timeline says it's basically a rapid-fire period of final judgments. Think of it like a cleanup operation. First, the system called Babylon, often seen as a corrupt global power, is totally dismantled. Then the armies of that Antichrist figure are judged. And finally, Satan himself is imprisoned, which clears the stage for whatever comes next.
Okay, so now let's just step back and look at the whole puzzle, completely assembled. We've put all the key numbers and all the big events onto our timeline. Let's see how it all adds up and forms one complete, cohesive picture. At least, according to this interpretation.
And here it is. This is the big aha moment where it all just clicks into place. The really intense period, the tribulation, lasts until that resurrection on day 1335. The 7 plagues then happen over the next 965 days, and those final 220 days are for judgment. So let's add it up. 1335 plus 965 plus 220 equals exactly 2,520. Every single day of the final 7 years is accounted for.
So, to quickly recap the key points of this whole framework, it all kicks off with the last week in the 2300 days starting at the same time. That blessed event on day 1335, that's the first resurrection. The 2300-day prophecy ends with the cleansing of the heavenly temple, which lines up with the end of the plagues. And that final 220-day stretch is reserved for tying up all the loose ends.
You know, at the end of the day, interpretations like this are trying to draw a detailed map of the future from these ancient texts. It's a pretty fascinating exercise in solving a really complex puzzle, and it kind of leaves us with one final thought. If prophecy really is a map, what's the point of knowing the route ahead of time? What does that change about the journey we're on today?